The morning sun glinted off the Blackwood Tower, 70 stories of steel and glass that pierced the city skyline like a monument to ambition itself. At its summit, Alexander Mercer surveyed his domain with cold, calculating eyes. At 43, he had amassed a fortune that made nations tremble, built on the ruins of companies he had systematically dismantled and absorbed. "The Clayton merger is finalized," his assistant said, sliding a document across the polished obsidian desk. Their board had no choice. Alexander barely acknowledged her presence, his attention caught by the street below. A young woman exited a small bakery, her brown hair gathered in a simple ponytail, flour dusting her apron. Something about her casual grace made him pause. "Who is that?" he asked, gesturing toward the window. His assistant looked confused. "Sir, the Clayton family is expecting your call to discuss." "Not Clayton," Alexander snapped. "The bakery. Who owns it?" Within an hour, a dossier landed on his desk. The bakery had been there for decades, a family business that somehow survived the economic typhoon he had engineered to clear the block for his next development. Its stubborn existence was an irritation he had overlooked. Until now. "Cielo," chimed softly as Alexander entered Hartman's bakery the next morning, looking jarringly out of place in his bespoke suit. The aroma of fresh bread enveloped him, unfamiliar and oddly comforting. "Can I help you?" The woman from yesterday stood behind the counter, her name tag reading Eliza. Her smile wavered slightly at the sight of him, as though she recognized predatory wealth when she saw it. "Coffee black," Alexander said, deliberately scanning the small space. "Quaint operation you have here." "We've been here 46 years, Eliza replied, her tone carrying unexpected steel beneath its warmth. "My grandfather started it. Coffee's $3. Alexander placed a $100 bill on the counter. "Keep the change. Consider it a donation to whatever this is." Her eyes flashed. "We don't need donations, we need customers who respect what we do." She pushed the bill back across the counter. "Your coffee's on the house today. But next time, bring exact change and a better attitude." For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander Mercer was speechless. As he left, coffee untouched. The peculiar feeling in his chest wasn't anger. It was fascination. He had built his empire on identifying weaknesses, but Eliza Hartman seemed to have none he recognized. In his office that afternoon, he canceled 3 meetings and stared at the bakery's property assessment. One signature would begin the process of destroying it. Instead, he found himself researching artisanal baking traditions, an inexplicable detour that lasted into the night. When his assistant entered, concern etched on her face, she found him watching security footage from the bakery's street. On screen, Eliza locked up, then stopped to give half her sandwich to a homeless man before walking away into the evening light. "Sir, the Tokyo investors are waiting." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Tell them something came up. I need to rethink our strategy for the West Side development." As darkness fell over the city, 2 worlds had begun an unexpected collision course. The man who had everything but felt nothing, and the woman who had little but gave much. Neither could have predicted the devastation that would follow. Alexander returned to Hartman's bakery daily for 2 weeks. Each morning, he absorbed Eliza's world. The elderly customers she knew by name, her swift efficiency in crisis, her unguarded laugh. He learned she worked 16-hour days to keep the bakery afloat after her father's stroke, that she had abandoned art school to take over the family business, that beneath her flour-dusted exterior lay an intellect that challenged his own. "You're becoming a regular," Eliza remarked on the 15th day, sliding his coffee across the counter. "Still haven't figured out why a man who owns half the skyline spends his mornings in my little shop." Alexander straightened his tie. "Perhaps I appreciate authenticity." "Authenticity?" Eliza laughed. "Is that what your kind calls slumming it these days?" Her directness both wounded and intrigued him. In his world, people performed calculated deference. Eliza offered only unvarnished truth. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said suddenly. Eliza's eyebrows rose. I close at 8. 8:30 then. I'll send a car. She wiped her hands on her apron. I can drive myself, thanks. And it's just dinner, Mr. Mercer, not a merger. That evening, Alexander waited at Stellaris, the exclusive restaurant atop his hotel. When Eliza arrived in a simple blue dress, he watched the maitre d' nearly refuse her entry until he intervened. The other diners stared openly as she crossed the room, a commoner among aristocracy. "You look uncomfortable," Alexander observed after ordering wine without consulting her. "I am." Eliza glanced around. "This isn't exactly my scene." "It could be." The words escaped before he could filter them. Her eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Alexander leaned forward. "Your bakery sits on land worth millions. You work yourself to exhaustion for pennies when you could sell and live comfortably." "That bakery is my heritage," she replied, voice tight. "Not everything valuable can be quantified in dollars." "Everything has a price," he countered. "You're sacrificing your talents, your future." "You know nothing about my talents or future," Eliza interrupted. "That bakery feeds families who remember when bread was shared, not hoarded. It's the last place on that street where people matter more than profit margins." Their conversation spiraled through the evening, him arguing rational economics, her defending human connection. Yet beneath their philosophical clash, something electric flowed. Her conviction awakened something dormant in him. Respect. As his chauffeur drove her home, Alexander made a decision that would forever alter his trajectory. The next morning, he canceled the West Side development project, forgetting the predator he had always been in his fascination with this woman who refused to become prey. His board was outraged. His investors threatened revolt. Alexander, for the first time, did not care. "You're jeopardizing everything for some baker?" his CFO demanded during an emergency meeting. "I'm reconsidering our approach," Alexander replied coolly, but inside, confusion reigned. He had built his fortune by destroying sentiment, by seeing people as pawns. Now he found himself protecting a bakery because a woman's smile had somehow breached his defenses. When he arrived at Hartman's the following day, Eliza was waiting. "Your assistant called my father," she said, eyes flashing. "Offered to buy our building for twice market value. After you canceled your development? What game are you playing?" "No game," Alexander replied, suddenly uncertain. "I thought that I'd be grateful? That my principles were for sale just at a higher price?" Her voice trembled. "I misjudged you. I thought there might be a human being under that designer suit." As she turned away, Alexander caught her arm. "Eliza, please." "Don't touch me," she whispered. "You see the world as something to possess. I'm not another acquisition." When she was gone, he stood alone in the morning light, tasting an unfamiliar emotion. Shame. The great Alexander Mercer, who had dismantled corporations without remorse, was unraveling over a rejection from a baker with flour-dusted hands. For 38 days, Alexander sought to reach Eliza. His calls echoed into voicemail oblivion. His carefully selected orchids were returned, their delicate petals bruised from the journey back. The bakery's vintage blinds remained stubbornly, drawn whenever his distinctive black Bentley appeared on the street. Though his corporate empire continued to function with mechanical precision, a testament to the ruthlessly efficient machine he had constructed, he, its architect and master, found himself increasingly fixated on the absence of someone who existed entirely outside his sphere of influence. The Blackwood Tower's executive floor operated in hushed tones as Alexander's temper grew increasingly volatile. Board meetings became battlegrounds where the slightest disagreement might trigger his wrath. 3 senior executives resigned within a week. "You've lost focus," remarked Victor Chen one evening, swirling 20-year-old Macallan in a crystal tumbler. They sat in Alexander's penthouse, 60 floors above the city's glittering landscape. As his oldest friend and legal counsel, Victor alone could speak such truths without fear of retribution. "I've watched you dismantle billion-dollar enterprises without the slightest hesitation. I've seen you ruin men's lives over breakfast and sleep soundly that same night. Now you're languishing over a woman who sells sourdough for a living? This isn't merely unlike you, Alexander. It's becoming dangerous. Alexander stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette sharp against the night sky. She sees through me, Victor. No artifice, no hidden agenda. Do you know how rare that is in our world? Everyone has an agenda, Victor countered, his reflection appearing beside Alexander's in the glass. Perhaps you've simply not discovered hers? Have you considered that her rejection might be calculated? The surest way to capture a collector's interest is to remain just beyond his reach. The suggestion lingered like slow-acting poison in Alexander's mind. That night, after Victor departed, he stood in his private study contemplating a weathered photograph of his father. The man who had taught him that power was the only true currency and vulnerability was merely weakness by another name. "What would you do?" he whispered to the stern face that had never shown him affection. The answer came with brutal clarity. Control the situation by any means necessary. At 2:17 a.m., Alexander made a call to Marcus Reeves, the shadow operative who had unearthed countless corporate secrets for him over the years. A man whose methods were effective precisely because they operated beyond legal and ethical boundaries. "Find everything on Eliza Hartman," he ordered, voice cold with renewed purpose. "Family history, financial records, personal weaknesses, every detail no matter how insignificant. I want to know her better than she knows herself." 7 days. Later, a comprehensive file arrived via encrypted channel. Alexander dismissed his staff, locked his office doors, and immersed himself in Eliza's life. What he discovered beneath the bakery's quaint facade was financial devastation. Medical bills from her father's stroke had drained their modest savings to the last cent. 3 bank loans had been denied in the past month alone. The building itself, designated a historical property in 1986, had serious structural issues that would require funds the Hartmans simply didn't possess. Most revealing was a journal entry photographed from Eliza's personal notebook. "Dad's condition worsening. Dr. Brennan recommends specialized care we can't afford, considering night shifts at Memorial Hospital. Cannot lose this place. It's all that remains of our family legacy. Will not let this break me." Power surged through Alexander again, the familiar intoxication of holding someone's fate in his manicured hands. This was the language he understood, the leverage point he needed. A predatory smile formed as he drafted acquisition papers for the entire block, including contingencies specifically designed to pressure the Hartman property. The following morning, dressed immaculately in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, Alexander strode into Hartman's bakery during what his surveillance had identified as their slowest hour. The bell's cheerful chime contrasted sharply with the tension that immediately filled the space. Eliza froze behind the counter, a smudge of flour accentuating her cheekbone. "We're closed," she said, though the hand-painted sign clearly read, "Open." "I have a proposition." He placed a leather portfolio on the counter between them. "Your father's medical debt, cleared entirely. Funds for comprehensive renovations. A business partnership that preserves this establishment while making it financially viable for generations to come." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "In exchange for what?" "Time," he replied simply. "Dinner once a week. Your perspective on certain matters, that's all I ask." "You investigated me." Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, hands gripping the countertop until her knuckles whitened. "You looked into my private struggles, my father's illness, so you could exploit them for, what, my company, my compliance?" "I looked because I care," he countered, leaning forward. "This isn't exploitation, it's assistance. What difference does the motivation make if the outcome benefits you?" "The difference is everything." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "From where I stand, it looks like calculated manipulation. Did you think my principles would crumble under financial pressure? That I'd be so pathetically grateful I'd overlook who you fundamentally are?" "And who am I?" he demanded, genuine confusion bleeding into his irritation. "A man who destroys things because he can't understand their true value. she answered without hesitation. Who believes everything and everyone has a price, that enough pressure applied in the right places will yield whatever he desires. You collect companies the way others collect art, without concern for the lives affected. Her words sliced through his practiced veneer. For a fleeting moment, vulnerability flickered across his features, so brief she might have imagined it. Behind her, the bakery's ancient oven timer chimed softly. "I've never claimed to be a good man," Alexander said quietly, uncharacteristic, uncertainty tempering his usual arrogance. "But I'm trying to be different, better. By investigating my family? By leveraging my father's illness?" Eliza shook her head, disappointment evident in her expression. "That's not change, Alexander. That's just finding new tactics to get what you want." She pushed the portfolio back across the counter, refusing even to open it. "I'd rather lose this bakery than compromise what it stands for. Please leave. Don't come back." As Alexander stepped onto the street, sunlight harsh after the bakery's warm glow, his phone vibrated. Marcus Reeves had sent additional information. Thomas Hartman's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Specialized medical expenses would exceed $300,000 annually. Foreclosure proceedings would begin within 3 months. A competitor, Transcontinental Developments, had already made inquiries about the property. Alexander stood motionless on the sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around him like water around stone. For the first time in his adult life, he struggled to reconcile his instincts with an unfamiliar voice emerging from some long-dormant corner of his conscience. That night, sequestered in his office while rain lashed against panoramic windows, Alexander made 2 calls that would fundamentally alter his trajectory. The first ensured that anonymous donations would cover Thomas Hartman's medical care indefinitely, with provisions for experimental treatments and home nursing staff. The second transferred ownership of the bakery building to a trust with Eliza, named as beneficiary, no strings attached, no mention of his involvement, with additional funds allocated for renovation and business expansion. Victor was apoplectic when he discovered the transactions. "You've given away prime real estate valued at $17 million to a woman who explicitly rejected you? The board will have legitimate grounds to question your competence." "I'm doing what's right," Alexander replied, the unfamiliar words sounding strange even to his own ears. "Right?" Victor scoffed, incredulous. "Since when has right factored into your business decisions? This isn't philanthropy, Alexander, it's obsession, and it will destroy everything you've built." Later, alone in his penthouse sanctuary, Alexander stood before his father's portrait. "You would call this weakness," he acknowledged. "Perhaps you'd be correct." For the first time in decades, he slept without dreaming of acquisition or conquest or the endless expansion of his empire. Instead, he dreamed of flour-dusted hands and uncompromising eyes that had somehow penetrated his carefully constructed armor to glimpse the hollow man beneath. As dawn broke over the skyline, a text message illuminated his phone screen. From Eliza. "I know what you did. We need to talk." The cafe overlooking Central Park was neutral territory. Neither the bakery, that was Eliza's domain, nor the sleek corporate settings where Alexander reigned. Rain tapped against the windows as they sat across from each other, steam rising from untouched cups. "Why did you do it?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible above the ambient cafe noise. "The trust fund, my father's medical care, all anonymously. You didn't even try to use it as leverage." Alexander studied her face, searching for the right words. Unfamiliar territory for a man accustomed to dictating terms rather than explaining them. "Because you were right about me," he admitted finally. "I've spent my life believing everything has a price, that people are ultimately transactional. You showed me something different. And this grand gesture erases decades of ruthlessness." Her tone wasn't accusatory, merely questioning. "No," Alexander replied with unexpected candor. "Nothing erases the past, but perhaps it begins a different future." Their conversation stretched for hours as rain turned to mist, and then to evening clarity. Alexander revealed fragments of his childhood. A father who measured love in achievements, a mother who disappeared when he was 8, the gradual calcification of his heart behind walls of ambition and acquisition. "You built an empire by destroying others," Eliza observed as shadows lengthened across their table. "I did," he acknowledged. "I told myself it was merely business, natural selection in an economic ecosystem. I never allowed myself to see the human cost." As they parted that evening, something tentative had formed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but a fragile bridge spanning their disparate worlds. Over the following months, Alexander began a transformation that stunned the business world. The predatory tactics that had defined Mercer Enterprises gave way to sustainable investments and ethical business practices. His board revolted. Shareholders threatened legal action. Victor Chen resigned in protest. "You're committing corporate suicide," Victor warned during their final meeting. "This woman has bewitched you into destroying everything we built." "What we built was hollow," Alexander replied. "I'm trying to create something worth preserving." As winter yielded to spring, Alexander and Eliza's relationship blossomed cautiously. She remained skeptical of his transformation, but couldn't deny its authenticity. The bakery, now structurally sound and financially secure, expanded its community, programs under her guidance. Alexander often volunteered there, his expensive suits exchanged for simple shirts and jeans, learning to create rather than consume. The financial press dubbed it Mercer's madness, when he declined a hostile takeover that would have added billions to his worth but cost thousands their jobs. Yet for every detractor, allies emerged, ethical investors, community leaders, employees, who witnessed his evolution from tyrant to advocate. On a crisp autumn evening a year after their first meeting, Alexander took Eliza to the rooftop garden he had created atop the Blackwood Tower, a green sanctuary amid urban steel. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to a small greenhouse. Inside, rare botanical specimens thrived, including a delicate orchid variant thought extinct. It took researchers years to revive this species. They named it Second Chance. Eliza touched the luminous petals gently. "It's beautiful. Like you, it survives against impossible odds," Alexander said softly. "I thought nothing could change me, Eliza. I was wrong." As their relationship deepened, so did the opposition to Alexander's transformed business philosophy. Former allies became enemies. Competitors sensed weakness. Victor Chen, now heading a rival firm, orchestrated a coordinated attack on Mercer Enterprises' vulnerabilities. The crisis hit on a rainy Tuesday. Alexander was volunteering at the bakery when his phone exploded with alerts. A sophisticated cyber attack had breached his company's systems, exposing controversial acquisitions from his ruthless past while simultaneously triggering a stock collapse. Years of buried secrets, legal but damning, surfaced in a perfectly timed exposé. "It's Victor," Alexander told Eliza as they watched his empire crumble on the bakery's small television. "He's using my past to destroy my present." "Will you fight back?" she asked quietly. The old Alexander would have launched immediate counterattacks, leveraging every dirty secret he possessed about his enemies. Instead, he made a different choice. "No," he said. "Fighting would mean becoming that person again." Within weeks, Mercer Enterprises was dismantled. The board ousted him. His fortune diminished by billions. The press swarmed like vultures, celebrating the fall of a titan known for toppling others. On the day Alexander cleared his office, Eliza waited outside Blackwood Tower. Together, they walked through the financial district, past buildings he once owned, toward an uncertain future. "I lost everything," he said as they reached the Hudson River. "Everything I spent my life building." Eliza took his hand. "Not everything." 6 months later, a small ethical investment firm opened in a renovated brownstone. Alexander Mercer, once the most feared man in finance, now focused on funding community businesses and sustainable technologies. His client list was modest, his office simple, his goals transformed. The bakery continued to thrive, now a neighborhood institution offering apprenticeships to disadvantaged youth. Eliza and Alexander created a foundation using the remains of his fortune, focused on medical care for families facing catastrophic illness. On the anniversary of his corporate collapse, Alexander stood outside the bakery at closing time, watching Eliza through the window as she taught a teenage apprentice the art of bread making. Her patience, her generosity, her unwavering principles, these were the qualities that had undone his empire, and, in doing so, saved his soul. As snow began to fall, Alexander understood the cosmic irony of his journey. In losing his kingdom, he had found his humanity. The cruel billionaire had died so the man could live. The consequences of his past would always shadow him. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Mercer walked toward the future without the weight of emptiness. The price of redemption had been everything he once valued, and it was worth every penny. The champagne flowed like water at the Goldstein Foundation's annual charity gala. Chandeliers cast prismatic light across the ballroom of New York's most exclusive hotel, where Manhattan's elite performed their well-rehearsed dance of wealth and influence. At the center of it all stood Gabriel Harrington, 36 years old, with a jawline that could cut glass and a bank account that could buy the building they stood in. Twice. Forbes had recently crowned him the youngest self-made decabillionaire in history, a title he wore like a second skin. "Mr. Harrington, your donation will change countless lives," gushed the charity director, a woman whose name Gabriel hadn't bothered to remember. "That's the idea," he replied with practiced charm, his smile never reaching his steel blue eyes. He checked his watch, custom Patek Philippe naturally, and calculated how much longer social propriety required him to stay. 43 minutes, he decided. Across the room, Eliza Winters rushed through the service entrance, balancing a tray of hors d'oeuvres that felt increasingly precarious. At 29, with wild auburn curls escaping her hastily assembled bun, she wasn't supposed to be here at all. But when her roommate Sophie called in sick for her catering shift, Eliza had volunteered. They needed the money, and she needed the distraction from her stalled career as a botanical illustrator. "Remember," the catering manager had warned, "these people don't see the staff. Stay invisible." Eliza nodded seriously while silently contemplating how anyone could be invisible while wearing the ridiculous penguin suits they called uniforms. She wove expertly between guests, offering tiny food on tiny plates to people who barely acknowledged her existence. Until disaster struck. Later, witnesses would argue about whose fault it was. Some claimed Gabriel had pivoted too abruptly while dismissing a persistent venture capitalist. Others insisted Eliza had been moving too quickly. The security footage would eventually reveal it was the drunken heir to a shipping fortune who had stumbled backward at precisely the wrong moment, creating a human domino effect. Whatever the cause, the result was spectacular. Eliza's tray of seafood canapes launched skyward. Time seemed to slow as tiny toast points topped with caviar and creme fraiche arced through the air with ballistic precision and landed, every single one, on Gabriel Harrington's immaculate midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo. The room fell silent. A camera flashed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Gabriel's voice cut through the silence, each word dripping with Arctic disdain. Eliza's eyes widened. She had two choices: apologize profusely or improved your outfit, she suggested, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned ballroom. "That much starch was making you look like a mannequin anyway." Someone gasped. Someone else snickered. Gabriel's expression shifted from shock to outrage. "You're fired," he snarled. Eliza smiled sweetly. "You can't fire me. You don't employ me." "Then I'll make sure whoever does will regret it," he threatened, reaching for his phone. Something inside Eliza snapped. Years of struggling to make rent, of rejection letters from publishers, of watching trust fund kids open vanity galleries while she waited tables, it all crystallized into a perfect moment of righteous fearlessness. "Go ahead," she said, stepping closer. "Show everyone exactly who you are. The great Gabriel Harrington, who built an empire but can't handle a little seafood on his precious suit without throwing a tantrum. The assembled crowd had formed a circle around them, phones recording surreptitiously. Gabriel suddenly realized he had an audience, and not one that was admiring him. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd nearly forgotten: embarrassment. Before he could respond, Eliza grabbed a napkin from a nearby table and held it out to him. "Or," she said more quietly, "you could just clean up and laugh it off like a normal human being." Their eyes locked, a battle of wills conducted in silence. And then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, Gabriel Harrington laughed. It wasn't his media-trained chuckle or his boardroom power laugh. It was genuine, unexpected, and somehow transformed his entire face. "Normal human being," he repeated thoughtfully. "I'll have to try that sometime." Eliza's expression softened slightly. "You should. You might like it." As the crowd dispersed, Gabriel found himself holding a business card he didn't remember accepting, with a name he suddenly couldn't forget. Eliza Winters, Botanical Illustrations. What he didn't know yet was that the photo of him covered in canapés was already going viral online, with the caption, "Even billionaires get served sometimes." Gabriel Harrington's corner office on the 87th floor offered a panoramic view of Manhattan that made visitors feel like gods overlooking their domain. But today he barely noticed it. Instead, his attention was fixed on his phone, scrolling through the hundreds of memes that had spawned from his seafood incident 3 days ago. "Mr. Harrington," his assistant Miranda tentatively interrupted, "your 10 o'clock is waiting in the conference room." "Cancel it," he said without looking up. "But sir, it's the Tokyo merger." "I said cancel it," Gabriel snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. Miranda had been with him for 5 years and didn't deserve his frustration. "Sorry, reschedule. For tomorrow. And find me everything you can on an Eliza Winters Botanical Illustrator." Miranda's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest she ever came to showing surprise, before she nodded and exited. 30 minutes later, Gabriel was staring at a slim folder. For someone living in the digital age, Eliza Winters had a remarkably minimal online presence. Graduated from Rhode Island School of Design with honors, occasional illustrations in scientific journals, a modest website showcasing her work, exquisite detailed renderings of plants that somehow captured both scientific accuracy and artistic beauty, and a struggling Etsy shop selling prints. What the folder didn't explain was why he couldn't get her out of his mind. Eliza's apartment in Brooklyn was what real estate agents charitably called cozy, and what her mother called a tetanus risk. But the north-facing windows provided perfect light for her work, and the fire escape had enough room for her collection of rare herbs. She was putting the finishing touches on a commission, a series of heirloom tomato varieties for a seed catalog, when someone knocked on her door. Assuming it was Mrs. Kowalski from downstairs complaining about the creaky floorboards again, Eliza opened it without checking first. She froze. Gabriel Harrington stood in her hallway, looking simultaneously commanding and uncomfortable in a casual outfit that probably cost more than her rent. "How did you find me?" she asked, too surprised to be polite. "I have resources," he said, then winced at how ominous that sounded. "I mean, I asked around. May I come in?" Against her better judgment, Eliza stepped aside. "I'd offer you something, but all I have is tap water and some questionable leftover Thai food." Gabriel scanned the apartment, the drafting table by the window, walls covered with botanical sketches, mismatched furniture clearly salvaged from various sources. It was smaller than his master bathroom, yet somehow felt more like a home than his penthouse ever had. "I have a proposition for you," he said, turning to face her. Eliza crossed her arms. "If this is about suing me for defamation or dry cleaning costs, I should warn you I'm spectacularly judgment-proof." Gabriel actually smiled. "Nothing like that. I want to hire you." "To do what?" she asked suspiciously. "The Harrington Foundation is publishing a book on endangered plant species. We need an illustrator." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "The Harrington Foundation didn't exist until I looked you up yesterday, after you became Canapé Man online." Gabriel. had the grace to look sheepish. I'm establishing it now, and the book is going to be our first project. So you invented a foundation and a book just to what? Buy my silence? Repair your image? I'm not explaining this well, Gabriel said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it for the first time in possibly years. The truth is, I looked at your work. It's extraordinary. And yes, I've been thinking about my public image since that photo went viral, but not in the way you think. He took a deep breath. You were right. I've become someone I don't particularly like. That night at the gala was the first time in years anyone's been honest with me. It was refreshing. Eliza studied him, searching for insincerity and finding, to her surprise, vulnerability instead. So your proposition is, work with me on making the foundation real. The book too. Full creative control, proper credit, and a fee that would let you focus on your art without worrying about catering, gigs. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Gabriel hesitated. Your perspective, your honesty. I have advisors and employees and sycophants, but no one who sees me as just a person. The afternoon light filtering through her windows caught in his eyes, revealing flecks of gray she hadn't noticed before. For a moment, he didn't look like a billionaire or a meme, just a man asking for help. You could buy that from any number of consultants, Eliza pointed out. I'm not looking to buy anything. I'm offering a legitimate job to a talented artist. He paused, and hoping that honest feedback might come as a side benefit. Eliza walked to her drafting table, considering. The commission she was working on would barely cover this month's bills, and the thought of drawing endangered plants, bringing attention to species on the brink, it was exactly the kind of work she'd always wanted to do. I have conditions, she said finally. Gabriel smiled, and for the second time it reached his eyes. I expected nothing less. The foundation has to be real, with actual conservation work, not just a vanity project. Agreed. And I'm not moving into some corporate office. I work from here. We'll need to meet occasionally, but otherwise fine. And the most important thing, Eliza turned to face him fully. You have to promise never to wear that cologne again. It's giving me a headache. Gabriel blinked, then laughed. That same genuine laugh from the gala. Deal. As they shook hands, neither noticed Eliza's roommate Sophie peeking through the cracked bedroom door, eyes wide with disbelief, already composing a text to their friends. You won't believe who's in our living room right now. You're going where? Gabriel stared at Eliza as if she'd suggested they vacation on Mars. The Amazon rainforest, Eliza repeated, pointing to the circled location on the map spread across his desk. If we're doing a book on endangered plant species, we need first-hand references. These orchids only bloom for 2 weeks a year, which happens to be now. 6 weeks into their partnership, Gabriel had given up on predicting Eliza's next move. The foundation offices, once a sterile monument to corporate aesthetics, now featured living plant walls, biodegradable furniture, and actual windows that opened. His executives were simultaneously horrified and fascinated by the botanical illustrator who spoke to the decabillionaire as if he were any ordinary colleague. There are things called photographs, Gabriel said dryly, usually taken by people who specialize in not getting eaten by jaguars. Eliza rolled her eyes. You can't capture the true essence of a living thing through someone else's lens. Besides, she added with a mischievous glint, I already booked the flights. Flights? Plural? You're coming too. She said it so matter-of-factly that for a moment he didn't register the absurdity. I have a company to run. 3 companies, actually. And you have competent people running them while you're in meetings. Consider this a field meeting. She studied him with amused assessment. When's the last time you did something unplanned? Something without security details and itineraries and people clearing the way for you? Gabriel opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He genuinely couldn't remember. That's what I thought, Eliza said softly. The book was your idea, Gabriel. Don't you want to see these wonders before they're gone forever? The use of his first name, something she'd started doing recently, still created an odd flutter in his chest. He looked at the map again, at her finger resting on a remote corner of the world. "I don't even own hiking boots," he muttered, which they both recognized as surrender. 3 days later, Gabriel Harrington, who owned properties on 3 continents, found himself sleeping in a hammock strung between 2 ancient trees. The night symphony of the rainforest surrounded them. Insects buzzing, frogs croaking, mysterious rustlings in the underbrush. Their small expedition included a local guide, a botanist from São Paulo University, and Eliza, whose delight in their surroundings was contagious. Gabriel had initially insisted on bringing security, until Eliza pointed out that his regular security team would likely cause more destruction to the delicate ecosystem than protection. "Still awake?" Eliza's whisper came from the hammock next to his. "How could anyone sleep through this racket?" he whispered back, but without annoyance. He heard her soft laugh. "It's the sound of life, Gabriel. Millions of species communicating, hunting, loving, surviving." The word loving hung in the humid air between them. "Look up," she said. Gabriel tilted his head back and gasped. Without light pollution, the night sky revealed itself in all its glory, a vast canvas of stars, impossibly bright and numerous. "I've never," he began. "I know," Eliza said quietly. "There's a lot of beauty in the world that can't be bought or sold." In the darkness, Gabriel felt a peculiar sensation, a dismantling of the armor he'd built around himself over years of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Here, his wealth meant nothing. His name opened no doors. The jungle didn't care about his portfolio or his influence. And oddly, that felt like freedom. The next morning, they trekked to a remote valley where their target species bloomed in secluded splendor. Eliza set up her portable easel while Gabriel, surprisingly useful, helped catalog specimens with the botanist. He watched as Eliza became absorbed in her work, her face taking on a serene focus he'd come to admire. Sweat dampened her hair, and a smudge of dirt decorated her cheek, but she'd never looked more beautiful to him. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. Later, as they carefully navigated a slippery path back to camp, Gabriel lost his footing. Eliza instinctively grabbed his hand to steady him, and neither let go after the danger passed. That evening, as a tropical storm swept through the forest, they huddled in a small research station, drinking local coffee and reviewing Eliza's preliminary sketches by lamplight. "These are remarkable," Gabriel said, genuinely awed by the life she captured on paper. "You've made them look both scientifically accurate and somehow emotional." "Because they are emotional," Eliza responded, her voice soft but intense. "These plants have evolved over millions of years, developing complex relationships with their pollinators, adapting to challenges, and now they're threatened because we value short-term profit over ancient wonders." The criticism could have been directed at him. Once it would have been. But Gabriel heard only passion for her cause. "I want to help," he said simply. "Not just with the book, with actual conservation." Eliza looked up, surprise and pleasure warming her expression. "You already are." When their fingers brushed as she handed him another sketch, the jolt of electricity between them had nothing to do with the lightning outside. "Eliza," he began, not knowing what he intended to say. The research station door burst open, admitting their drenched guide. "River's rising," he announced. "We need to move to higher ground, now." As they hastily packed emergency supplies, Eliza caught Gabriel's eye. "Still wish you were in your corner office," she teased. Looking at her, vital, passionate, fearless, Gabriel realized there was nowhere else on earth he'd rather be. "Not for all the money in the world," he answered truthfully. And in that moment, amid danger and uncertainty, both recognized that something fundamental had changed between them, and within him. "You've got to be kidding me." Eliza stared at the invitation in her hands, an elegant cream-colored card embossed with gold lettering. The Goldstein Foundation annual gala? This is where we met. Crashed into each other technically, Gabriel corrected with a smile, leaning against the doorframe of her studio. 3 months had passed since their Amazon adventure. The foundation had blossomed from concept to reality, funding conservation projects worldwide. Their book was nearing completion, a stunning collection of Eliza's illustrations paired with stories of biodiversity and hope. And Gabriel Harrington had become unrecognizable to those who knew him before. Oh, he was still brilliant in business, still commanding in boardrooms. But something fundamental had shifted. Employees who once feared his wrath now sought his mentorship. Projects that once focused solely on profit now balanced purpose with prosperity. "I can't go to this," Eliza said, setting down the invitation. "I'm the canapé girl, remember? Half of Manhattan saw me covered in seafood." "Exactly why you should go." Gabriel moved into the studio, carefully navigating around her drafting table. This time as my guest rather than my nemesis. The word guest hung awkwardly between them. Despite the chemistry that had sparked in the rainforest, neither had acted on it. Back in New York, old insecurities had resurfaced. Eliza convinced that their worlds were too different. Gabriel afraid of ruining the most genuine relationship he'd ever had. "I don't exactly have gala attire," Eliza deflected, gesturing to her paint-splattered jeans and worn t-shirt. "Ah, about that." Gabriel reached for his phone and showed her a photo. "I took the liberty of having something delivered to your apartment." "You bought me a dress?" Eliza's eyebrows shot up. "Gabriel, that's completely inappropriate, I know," he finished. "That's why I didn't. I reserved 3 options from a sustainable designer you mentioned liking. You can choose one, all, or none. My stylist will handle everything either way." Eliza softened. This was the new Gabriel, thoughtful without being controlling, generous without wielding power. He'd learned. "All right," she agreed, "but I'm warning you now, I still can't tell a salad fork from a regular one." "Perfect," Gabriel grinned. "You can scandalize the socialites all over again." The night of the gala arrived with unseasonable warmth, stars visible even through Manhattan's light pollution. Eliza had chosen a midnight blue gown made from recycled materials, elegantly simple yet undeniably stunning. When Gabriel picked her up, the momentary silence as he took in her appearance told her everything she needed to know. "You look," he started. "Not like someone who might dump seafood on you?" she suggested with a nervous laugh. "Beautiful," he finished simply, "though I'd think that even if you were covered in canapés." The ballroom was just as opulent as Eliza remembered, but this time she entered through the front door on Gabriel's arm. Whispers followed them. The notorious canapé incident had become legend, especially after Gabriel's very public transformation. "Mr. Harrington," the charity director approached, her smile noticeably warmer toward Eliza than last year. "And Ms. Winters, your foundation's conservation work is remarkable." "It's Eliza's vision," Gabriel said. "I just provided the resources." "Don't let him fool you," Eliza countered. "He's spent more nights coding the conservation database than sleeping lately." The evening progressed with surprising ease. Gabriel introduced Eliza to environmental scientists rather than celebrities, positioned them near the exits for when she needed breathing room, and kept a protective distance without being possessive. As they stood near the balcony doors, catching a breeze, a waiter approached with a tray of familiar-looking canapés. "Oh no," Eliza laughed. "Keep those away from us." The waiter looked confused until Gabriel explained, chuckling. "Long story. Involves viral humiliation." After the waiter moved on, Gabriel became serious. "I never properly thanked you, you know." "For what? Nearly destroying your reputation?" Eliza asked lightly. "For saving me from myself." He guided her onto the empty balcony, the sounds of the gala fading behind them. "I was becoming someone I hated, isolated by wealth, insulated from reality, incapable of genuine connection." The moonlight silvered Eliza's features as she looked up at him. "You would have figured it out eventually." "No." Gabriel shook his head. "I was surrounded by people who benefited from that version of me. No one would have dared to challenge it." He took her hand gently. "You were the first person in years to see me, really see me, and not just my bank account." Eliza's heart raced. "Gabriel, let me finish," he said softly. "These past months working with you have been the most meaningful of my life. Not because of the foundation or the book, though I'm proud of both, but because of you, your passion, your honesty, your refusal to be impressed by anything except actual human decency." The city sprawled below them, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. "I've been afraid," Gabriel admitted. "Afraid that acting on what I feel would ruin what we've built." "And what do you feel?" Eliza asked, barely breathing. Instead of answering, with words, Gabriel slowly leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that felt simultaneously like coming home and setting out on a grand adventure. When they finally parted, Eliza smiled up at him. "For a brilliant businessman, you can be remarkably slow sometimes. I've been waiting for that since somewhere in the Amazon." Gabriel laughed, the sound of pure joy. "I should have known you'd be braver than me." "Speaking of brave," Eliza said, glancing back toward the ballroom, "are you ready to really give them something to talk about?" Gabriel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "With you, I'm ready for anything." As they walked back into the gala hand in hand, a photographer captured the moment. The former canapé man and his botanical illustrator, both radiantly happy. This photo too would go viral, but with a very different caption. "From canapé catastrophe to conservation power couple, the love story that changed a billionaire." 1 year later, the Harrington Winters Foundation opened its first public conservatory garden in Brooklyn, not far from Eliza's old apartment. Gabriel had insisted on naming a rare orchid variety after her, one they'd discovered together in the Amazon. In a quiet corner of the garden, away from the opening day festivities, Gabriel dropped to one knee beside a blooming Eliza's star orchid. "The first time we met, you knocked me down with seafood and humility," he said, holding up a simple ring carved from sustainable wood. "Would you consider knocking me off my feet every day for the rest of our lives?" Eliza's answer was never in doubt. She'd already designed their wedding invitations, illustrated with the plants that had brought them together. As she pulled him up into a kiss, surrounded by the living beauty they'd worked to preserve, Gabriel reflected that sometimes public humiliation could be the greatest gift of all, especially when delivered by exactly the right person.